Footsteps echoed through the sterile hallway, each click of my leather shoes heavier than the last. 25 years of sacrificing everything for my little girl culminated in this sickening moment. She sat at the plaintiff's table. She laughed. Her husband couldn't even meet my gaze. Welcome to my nightmare. Years ago, if you had told me my only child would one day drag me into a courtroom to declare me legally incompetent and seize my life's work, I would have laughed in your face. I raised Cassia single-handedly after her mother, Sarah, passed away. Cassia was just 3 years old at the time. From that day forward, my entire existence was dedicated to giving her a life devoid of the pain of that early loss. Every scraped knee, every heartbreak, every high school drama, I was there. I built Simmons Contracting from a single beat-up pickup truck into a multi-million-dollar commercial construction firm, not for the glory, but to ensure Cassia would never know the sting of financial struggle. Growing up, Cassia was my shadow. She would put on an oversized hard hat and walk the job sites with me, holding my calloused hand. We were a team. Just you and me against the world, kiddo, I used to tell her. She was a bright, empathetic girl. But, looking back now, perhaps I overcompensated for her mother's absence. I gave her everything she ever pointed at. Best private schools, a brand new car on her 16th birthday, a fully funded college tuition, and a massive safety net. I wanted to protect her, but I never realized I was unknowingly paving the road for my own destruction. Things began to subtly shift when Daniel entered the picture. Daniel Roberts was a financial advisor at a mid-tier firm when Cassia met him at a charity gala I had sponsored. He was undeniably charismatic, impeccably dressed, and had a silver tongue that could sell ice to a blizzard. At first, I liked him. He seemed respectful, ambitious, and, most importantly, he treated Cassia like a queen. They dated for 2 years before he came to my office, nervously twisting his watch to ask for my daughter's hand in marriage. I gave him my blessing. I paid for a lavish wedding overlooking the ocean, a 6-figure affair that made Cassia cry tears of joy. As a wedding gift, I handed them the deed to a beautiful 4-bedroom house in a pristine suburban neighborhood. I thought I was securing their future. I thought I was gaining a son. The cracks in the facade appeared slowly, so slowly that a father, blinded by love, could easily ignore them. It started with Daniel giving me unsolicited business advice. During Sunday dinners, he would casually suggest that Simmons Contracting was stagnating and needed to diversify into high-risk real estate investments. When I politely declined, citing my conservative business model that had kept the company profitable through 3 recessions, a brief, cold flash would cross his eyes. Then came the isolation. Cassia's daily phone calls dwindled to weekly texts. Our regular Sunday dinners were frequently canceled due to their busy schedules. When I did see her, Cassia seemed high-strung, nervous, and completely parroting Daniel's opinions. It was always "Daniel thinks we should," or "Daniel says your company's cash reserves are inefficient." The real breaking point occurred about 8 months before the trial. I turned 65 and decided it was time to start planning my succession. I hired a specialized corporate attorney to place my majority shares of the company into a blind trust, ensuring Cassia would receive a massive, guaranteed income for life, but stipulating that the company would be run by a board of directors. I did not name Daniel as the CEO. When I broke the news to them over dinner, Daniel's face went completely white. Cassia immediately became defensive, her voice rising in pitch as she demanded to know why her husband wasn't being handed the reins. "Cassia, sweetheart," I tried to explain calmly, "Daniel is a financial advisor, not a construction magnate. Running a firm with 400 employees requires a specific expertise. This trust guarantees you both are wealthy beyond measure, but it protects the employees and the legacy." Daniel didn't yell. He just placed his napkin on the table, stood up, and looked at me with an expression of pure, unadulterated contempt. "Come on, Cassia. Arian has made his priorities clear." That was the last time they ever sat at my dining table. 2 months later, the process server knocked on my door. I was enjoying a quiet Sunday morning, reading the paper, when a stranger handed me a thick manila envelope. I opened it, my eyes scanning the legal jargon, and my heart completely stopped. It was a petition for an emergency conservatorship. Cassia was suing me for total control of my medical and financial decisions, as well as immediate executive control of Simmons Contracting. Accompanying the petition was a sworn affidavit signed by my daughter, claiming that I was showing severe, accelerating signs of dementia. She alleged that I was mismanaging company funds, exhibiting erratic and paranoid behavior, and posing a danger to myself and my employees. She even included statements from a medical consultant who had never examined me, basing his opinion purely on anecdotes provided by Daniel and Cassia. I sat in my armchair for hours, the papers trembling in my hands. The betrayal was a physical weight on my chest, compressing my lungs until I couldn't breathe. My little girl, the child I had carried on my shoulders, the woman whose life I had paved with gold. She was trying to declare me legally insane to steal the company before I could secure it in the trust. The following months were a descent into a living hell. The grief of losing my daughter to this monstrous greed almost broke me. For the first 2 weeks, I barely slept or ate. I stared at old photographs, trying to reconcile the smiling, innocent child with the woman who had signed her name to a document full of vicious lies. But a father's despair can only last so long before a man's survival instinct kicks in. I realized this wasn't just about money. This was an assassination of my character, my sanity, and my life's work. The sadness hardened into a cold, unbreakable resolve. If Daniel wanted a war, and if Cassia was willing to be his primary weapon, I would fight back. Not with anger, but with absolute, overwhelming truth. I hired Richard Vance. No, wait, I can't use that name. I hired Richard Sterling. No, I hired Richard Harrison, the most ruthless and brilliant defense attorney in the state. Harrison looked at the paperwork, listened to my story, and immediately formulated a plan. "Arian," Richard said, sliding his glasses down his nose, "they are banking on you being an exhausted, heartbroken old man who will settle out of court to avoid public embarrassment. We are going to blindside them." First, I voluntarily submitted myself to a grueling 3-day battery of neurological and psychological evaluations at a premier medical institute. The result? A pristine bill of health. My cognitive function tested in the top percentile for my age. But playing defense wasn't enough. I needed to know exactly why this was happening now. Why the sudden, desperate land grab? I authorized Richard to hire a top-tier private investigator and a forensic accountant. What they uncovered over the next 3 months shattered any lingering illusions I had about my son-in-law. Daniel Roberts was drowning. Behind his custom-tailored suits and leased luxury cars, the man was a degenerate gambler and a chronic fraud. He had secretly leveraged the house I bought them, taking out a massive second mortgage that was currently in default. Worse, he had been quietly siphoning money from his own clients' portfolios to cover his margin calls and offshore betting accounts. The walls were closing in on him. He desperately needed a massive influx of untraceable cash to avoid federal prison, and Simmons Contracting's liquid assets were his only lifeline. The investigator also found a trail of digital communications showing how Daniel had spent the last 2 years systematically gaslighting Cassia. He had fabricated emails and staged phone calls to convince her that I was secretly planning to disinherit her, sell the company to a foreign conglomerate, and move overseas. He manipulated her fears, isolating her from me until she genuinely believed, or at least convinced herself, that taking control was the only way to save the family. Knowing all of this didn't lessen the pain of Cassia's betrayal. It only made it more tragic. She was a willing participant, blinded by a toxic marriage, choosing a liar over the father who had given her the world. The morning of the hearing, the sky was a heavy, slate gray. Rain lashed against the windshield of Richard's car as we drove to the courthouse. My stomach was a knot of acid and adrenaline. I wore my best Navy suit, my posture straight, preparing myself for the hardest day of my life. We walked through the heavy oak doors of the courtroom. The air was thick with tension, smelling of old paper and polished wood. That was when it happened, the moment that is burned into my retinas forever. Cassia and Daniel were already seated at the plaintiff's table with their legal team. As I walked down the aisle, the heavy wooden gate creaking as I pushed it open, Cassia turned to look at me. She didn't look remorseful. She didn't look sad. She looked at me, leaned over to her attorney, and let out a sharp, audible laugh. It was a laugh of supreme arrogance, a laugh that said, "Look at this old man walking into his own slaughter." It was the sound of a daughter who believed she had already won, utterly devoid of the empathy I had spent 25 years trying to instill in her. I stopped, dead in my tracks, letting the sound of her laughter wash over me. It was the final severing of the cord. The last shred of my paternal guilt evaporated in that instant. I shifted my gaze to Daniel. He was sitting next to her, gripping a gold pen. But, unlike my daughter, Daniel couldn't hold my stare. As my eyes locked onto him, a flash of pure panic crossed his face. He quickly looked away, staring intensely at a blank legal pad on the table, a muscle feathering in his jaw. He knew. He didn't know exactly what I had, but looking at my calm, unyielding posture, the coward in him recognized that I was not the broken old man he had portrayed in his filings. I took my seat next to Richard at the defense table. The judge, an austere woman named Honorable Judge Miller, slammed her gavel. "We are here for the matter of the conservatorship of Arian Simmons. Counsel for the petitioner, you may proceed with your opening statement." Cassia's lawyer, a slick, overconfident man, stood up. For 20 minutes, he painted a tragic, theatrical picture. He described me as a once brilliant titan of industry who was now tragically losing his grip on reality. He cited instances of my paranoia, weaving a narrative that I was aggressively turning against my own loving family due to early-onset dementia. He pointed to Cassia, who actually managed to squeeze out a singular, well-timed tear, claiming she was a devoted daughter making the hardest decision of her life to save her father from himself. I sat perfectly still, my face a mask of stone. I didn't interrupt. I didn't scowl. I just waited. When he finally sat down, Judge Miller looked over her glasses at my table. "Mr. Harrison, does the defense have an opening statement?" Richard Harrison stood up slowly, buttoning his suit jacket. He walked to the center of the courtroom, holding a single, slim folder. He didn't look at the judge right away. He looked directly at Daniel. "Your Honor," Richard began, his voice deep and resonant, filling the silent room. "The petitioner has painted a very moving picture of a tragic mental decline. However, they are about to learn a very hard lesson today. Fiction is for novels. In this courtroom, we deal in facts." Richard opened the folder. "We are not merely asking for this frivolous petition to be dismissed with prejudice," Richard continued, his voice dropping to a dangerous register. "We are here to present incontrovertible evidence that this entire proceeding is a malicious, fraudulent scheme orchestrated to cover up massive financial crimes committed by the petitioner's husband." The silence in the courtroom was absolute. I watched Cassia's smirk instantly vanish, replaced by a mask of sheer confusion. She glanced at Daniel. Daniel's face had drained of all color. He looked like a man standing on the gallows, listening to the trapdoor latch being pulled. The real trial had just begun. Pandemonium erupted at the plaintiff's table the second Richard uttered the word crimes. Cassia's slick attorney sprang to his feet, knocking his chair backward. "Objection, Your Honor. This is completely out of line. We are here to discuss a medical conservatorship, not listen to baseless, defamatory accusations against my client's husband." Judge Miller slammed her gavel, her stern eyes fixed on Richard. "Mr. Harrison, this is a highly unorthodox approach. You better have a mountain of evidence to back up these claims, or I will hold you in contempt." Richard didn't flinch. He calmly approached the bench, handing over a thick, bound stack of documents. "Your Honor, these are certified medical records from the Wellington Neurological Institute. As you will see, Arian Simmons voluntarily subjected himself to a rigorous, multi-day cognitive and psychological evaluation administered by 3 independent, board-certified neurologists. The results are unanimous. His mental acuity is flawless. The allegations of dementia are completely fabricated." Judge Miller opened the file, her eyes scanning the official seals and doctors' signatures. The courtroom held its collective breath. "Furthermore," Richard continued, turning on his heel to face Cassia and Daniel, "we have evidence that the petitioner's husband, Daniel Roberts, actively authored the false narratives presented in the affidavit. But why would he orchestrate such a monstrous lie? Because, Your Honor, Daniel Roberts is destitute." "Objection," the opposing counsel shrieked, though his voice wavered, lacking its previous confidence. He looked down at Daniel, who was violently shaking his head, his face slick with cold sweat. "Overruled," Judge Miller barked, not looking up from the medical reports. "Proceed, Mr. Harrison." Richard walked over to our table and picked up a second, much larger box of files. He dropped it onto the plaintiff's table with a loud, heavy thud. Daniel physically jumped in his seat. "Inside that box, counsel, you will find certified bank records, foreclosure notices, and offshore wire transfers," Richard announced, his voice carrying the weight of an executioner's axe. Daniel Roberts took out a clandestine second mortgage on the property Arian Simmons gifted them. That mortgage is currently 90 days past due. Even worse, forensic accountants have traced over $2 million siphoned from Mr. Roberts's private advisory clients directly into offshore betting syndicates and high-risk cryptocurrency accounts. Cassia stared at the box as if it contained a live explosive. Her mouth opened, but no sound came out. She slowly turned her head to look at her husband. Daniel refused to meet her gaze. He was staring straight ahead, his breathing shallow and rapid, his hands trembling violently on top of his legal pad. The gold pen he had been gripping earlier rolled off the table and clattered onto the hardwood floor. "Daniel," Cassia whispered. In the dead silence of the courtroom, that single, fractured word echoed off the walls. "Daniel, what is he talking about?" "Don't say anything," Daniel hissed through clenched teeth, finally breaking his silence. "They're lying. It's forged." Richard smiled a cold, predatory expression. "Your Honor, we have subpoenaed the financial records from Mr. Roberts's brokerage firm. The SEC has already been notified of our findings. Daniel Roberts didn't want control of Simmons contracting to protect his father-in-law. He needed executive authority to liquidate company assets, to replace the stolen client funds before federal regulators audited his firm." The opposing lawyer frantically flipped through the documents in the box, his face draining of color with every page he turned. He was a hired gun, completely unaware that his clients had used him to facilitate a multi-million-dollar fraud. He slowly backed away from Daniel, instinctively putting physical distance between himself and his radioactive client. "There is one final piece to this puzzle," Richard said, his tone softening slightly as he looked at Cassia, "and it is, perhaps, the most tragic." Richard pulled a single sheet of paper from his inside jacket pocket and handed it to the bailiff, who passed it to the judge. "Your Honor, you are looking at a forensic handwriting analysis of the second mortgage documents, as well as the initial financial disclosures filed with this very court. Cassia Roberts did not sign them." Daniel Roberts forged his wife's signature committing perjury and mortgage fraud, effectively rendering her an unwitting accessory to federal crimes. Cassia gasped, a raw, jagged sound of pure shock. She grabbed the documents from her attorney's hands, her eyes frantically darting across the pages. The realization hit her like a physical blow. The husband she had trusted implicitly, the man she had conspired with to ruin her own father, had secretly bankrupted her and forged her name on illegal loans. The life of luxury she thought they were living was a house of cards, financed by theft, and she was the scapegoat, standing directly underneath it. She looked up at me, her eyes, wide and brimming with terrified tears, searched mine for the safety net I had always provided. For 25 years, whenever she fell, I was there to catch her. I looked back at her, my posture rigid, my expression completely impassive. I didn't smile. I didn't frown. I just stared. In that moment, the ghost of her arrogant laughter echoed in my ears, drowning out her silent plea for help. I had nothing left to give her. The father who would have moved mountains to save her died the moment she laughed at his execution. Absolute silence engulfed the room as Judge Miller finished reviewing the final pages. She took off her reading glasses, her face a mask of judicial fury. "Counsel for the petitioner," Judge Miller began, her voice dangerously quiet. "Do you have any evidence to refute these documents? Any medical expert willing to testify under oath to Arian Simmons's supposed incapacity? Any financial records contradicting this evidence of gross fraud?" Cassia's lawyer stood up, his hands visibly shaking. He cleared his throat. "Your Honor, the petitioner. We request a recess to consult with my clients regarding these new developments." "Denied," the judge snapped, her gavel hitting the sounding block like a gunshot. "There will be no recess. I have seen enough. This petition is not only entirely without merit, it is a gross abuse of the judicial system. It is a disgusting, calculated attempt to weaponize a conservatorship for financial theft." She turned her scathing glare onto Daniel. "Mr. Roberts, this court is formally dismissing the petition for conservatorship with prejudice. Furthermore, I am directing the court clerk to forward every single piece of financial evidence submitted today to the district attorney's office and the Federal Bureau of Investigation. You are not leaving this courthouse with a victory today. You are leaving with a target on your back." Daniel buried his face in his hands, letting out a pathetic, muffled sob. The charismatic, silver-tongued manipulator was completely broken, exposed as a cowardly thief in front of God and everyone. "As for you, Mrs. Roberts," Judge Miller continued, looking at Cassia, "while it appears you may have been manipulated regarding the financial state of your marriage, your willingness to commit your own father to an institution based on fabricated anecdotes is reprehensible. Case dismissed." The gavel slammed down one final time. It sounded like a cell door, locking shut. Richard packed his briefcase calmly. I stood up, adjusting my tie. I felt lighter than I had in months, yet profoundly hollow. I had won my life back, but I had permanently lost my only child. We walked out of the courtroom and into the sprawling marble corridor. The rain outside had stopped, leaving pale, washed-out sunlight streaming through the tall windows. "Arian, wait. Please, Dad, wait." I stopped and turned. Cassia was running down the hallway toward me, her designer heels clicking frantically against the marble floor. Tears were streaming down her face, ruining her meticulous makeup. She looked disheveled, terrified, and utterly desperate. She stopped a few feet away from me, panting, reaching out a trembling hand. "Dad, I didn't know. You have to believe me. I didn't know about the money. He lied to me." "He told me you were sick, that you were going to lose everything. He manipulated me." I looked at her outstretched hand, but I didn't reach for it. I kept my arms perfectly still at my sides. "I believe you didn't know about the money, Cassia," I said, my voice steady and completely devoid of emotion. "Daniel is a master manipulator. He played you just like he played his clients." "So, you understand," she choked out, a glimmer of desperate hope flashing in her eyes. "Dad, we can fix this. I'll divorce him. I'll leave him today. I can move back home. We can go back to how it was." "No, we can't," I replied. "You didn't know about the fraud, but you knew I wasn't sick." Cassia froze, her breath catching in her throat. "You sat at my dining table and watched me rationally explain the succession plan," I continued, each word measured and precise. "You knew I was completely sane, but you let him convince you that stealing my company was justified. You signed an affidavit claiming I was a danger to myself. And today, when I walked into that courtroom, terrified and heartbroken, you didn't look at me with pity or concern." I stepped closer to her, my voice dropping to a harsh whisper. "You looked at me and you laughed." Cassia let out a gut-wrenching sob, collapsing to her knees right there in the courthouse hallway. She buried her face in her hands, crying out for me, apologizing over and over again. I looked down at the woman who used to be my entire world. The urge to bend down, scoop her up, and tell her everything would be okay flared in my chest, a phantom reflex from a quarter-century of parenting. But I extinguished it. I turned my back on her and walked away, her sobs echoing down the marble corridor until the heavy glass doors of the courthouse closed behind me, shutting out the sound completely. The aftermath was swift and brutal. 2 weeks later, Daniel was indicted on multiple counts of wire fraud, embezzlement, and forgery. Facing 20 years in federal prison, he accepted a plea deal and is currently serving a 10-year sentence in a minimum security facility. The bank foreclosed on the house I had bought them. Without Daniel's stolen income, and heavily burdened by the legal debt from his defense, Cassia was left completely bankrupt. She tried calling me countless times. She sent letters. She even showed up at the Simmons contracting headquarters, but I had instructed security to turn her away gently but firmly. I didn't leave her destitute, though. Despite everything, I couldn't let Sarah's daughter live on the streets. I instructed Richard to set up an irrevocable trust that pays Cassia's rent for a modest one-bedroom apartment and provides a strict grocery stipend. It's enough to survive, but not a penny more. She works as a receptionist at a dental office now. We haven't spoken since that day in the hallway. As for me, I finalized my succession plan. I transferred the majority ownership of Simmons Contracting into an employee stock ownership program. The men and women who helped me build the company with their sweat and loyalty now own it. I stepped down as CEO and bought a small cabin near a quiet lake. Sometimes, when I sit on the porch watching the sun set over the water, I look at an old faded photograph of a little girl in an oversized hard hat holding my hand. I mourn her. I mourn the daughter she used to be. But I do not regret walking away from the woman she chose to become. I survived the ultimate betrayal, and in the ashes of my old life, I finally found a quiet, untouchable peace. Thank you for listening to my story. Betrayal from those closest to us cuts the deepest, but walking away with your truth and dignity intact is the ultimate victory. If this story resonated with you and you want to hear more, please hit that like button, share this video with your friends, and subscribe to the channel for more real-life dramas.